We are going to spend the next 25 minutes discussing personalizing learning, project-based learning, and design thinking. We offer 2 courses on these topics through the Teacher Training Center, and we're joined today by those course trainers. Jen Swinehart is the Director of Research, Development, and Communications at Hong Kong Academy, and she teaches our course on personalizing learning. And Rich Lair is the head of the Design Technology Department at the International School Nido de Aguilas and co-teaches our course on problem, project, and design-based approaches to teaching with me. In addition to Jen and Rich, we are honored to have 2 other panelists with us today. We have Melissa Daniels, who was the principal of High Tech Middle Media Arts and is transitioning into her new role as the co-director of the New School Creation Fellows at the High Tech High Graduate School of Education. And Melissa is also a part of the School Redesign Collaborative and a former international school teacher. And in addition, we are honored to have Daniela Silva with us, who is the Director of Technology, Learning, and Innovation at Colegio Roosevelt in Lima, Peru. For our active Twitter users out there, you can now put a face to Daniela's tweets. And if you're not following her, I'm just going to give a little shout out. I would encourage you to follow her because she always shares really useful information. Our panel today is going to be discussing questions that were generated by people who were originally registered to take these 2 courses with us in Rome in July. As you're listening to the panel discussion, I would encourage you to send us questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get a chance to answer your question live, we will keep a transcript of your questions and get a response to you offline. In order to build that same sense of community that we create during our 5-day in-person institutes, this week in our virtual community, we've been asking our different panelists to share some recommendations for things to do outside of our panel sessions. On Monday, our panelists shared some reading recommendations. On Tuesday, we received some recommendations for podcasts and things to watch. Yesterday, our panelists shared some ideas around well-being. And today, we wanted to take a moment and reflect on some of the small things that we're especially grateful for right now. It can be easy to forget about all of the good things in our lives when the world seems just a little bit upside down. So there's this quote by Albert Schweitzer that says, "At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us." So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to share a small thing that they're grateful for. But I also want to ask each of you to write something, a small thing that you are grateful for as well. So if you're with us on Zoom, you can write something that you're grateful for in the chat. If you're with us live on Facebook, you can write something that you are grateful for in the Facebook comment section. And our hope through this is that in this moment of gratitude, we might be able to rekindle any of those flames out there that are on the verge of going out after a long semester of online teaching. So I'm just going to start with our panelists and ask if each of you could share one small thing that you are grateful for right now. And Jen, can I start with you?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I'm really grateful that the area in Hong Kong that I live in is out in the New Territories. And so I'm surrounded by nature. It's near country parks. And I get to wake up every morning and look at an absolutely stunning view because I live right on the seafront. And I think it's easy to take for granted in the busy mornings, getting ready to go into work or getting ready to log on to teach online, to kind of lose sight of that natural beauty that I'm surrounded by. So I'm really appreciative of some time now to be grounded here and actually pause and take it all in.
Great, thank you. Daniela, what's one small thing that you're grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for having my family healthy, whether it's here in Peru, in Ecuador, in the States, and Uruguay. I'm also grateful that quarantine might be over soon here in Lima, Peru, exactly in the entire country. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
Great, thank you. Rich, what's one thing you are grateful for right now?
I guess I'd say just finishing up 3 months of distance teaching. I'm really grateful for the families of our students at Nido, just how challenging that is for parents to not only juggle their own lives and their own work, but then support their students' learning. And we just saw families really step up, and that just made our life so much easier. So I'm really grateful for that.
Great, thanks, Rich. And Melissa, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, mine is sort of similar to Jen's. Though I'm really missing opportunities to travel right now, I'm feeling really grateful that I get to be sort of quarantined in San Diego, California, which is stunning. And so I've been enjoying just sort of getting out into the neighborhoods more and for runs and walks and feeling super grateful.
Great. Bambi, do you have one thing you want to share that you're grateful for right now?
I am grateful for over 32 years of the bounty of the positivity of international educators around the world. We just keep on going. And I am so grateful for that constant attitude, no matter what happens.
Great, thank you. All right, I know people are eager to hear a discussion around project-based learning, design thinking, and personalizing learning. So we are going to begin with some questions. And one question that people pose to us is asking about what's the difference between personalizing learning and differentiation? And then what does that look like when teaching? And so, Jen, as the instructor of this course, I know you spend a lot of time talking about the difference between differentiation and personalizing learning. And I'm wondering if you could start us off with some of your thinking.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really good question. And I think it's a question that, however I answer it right now, will not do it much service, because I think it's a really rich question to spend a lot of time unpacking. I think sort of in terms of definitions are sort of coming to a kind of a basic understanding. One of the ways that we really try to think about differentiation is that is something that's happening all the time in classrooms, and is something that is, I think, really importantly, available to all students. So sometimes there's a sense of differentiation only happens for a child with some kind of an identified learning need, or it only happens if we're trying to accommodate language diversity. And actually, that level of teachers tailoring their instruction and giving choice to kids is something that's happening all the time. When we shift the level of personalization, it's really actually an opportunity to move more towards a sense of co-creation within a classroom. It's really handing over much more of that ownership to students and looking for ways to elevate their role in either identifying outcomes within a classroom, maybe developing the sorts of assessments that they want to demonstrate their understanding, having influence over sort of the teaching design in terms of maybe the lesson sequence. So there's opportunities to be much more sort of comprehensive in the way that we look at the role of a child, the role of a learner in influencing where the learning is now and where it's going to go, and how they have a chance to show what it is that they understand.
Great, thanks, Jen. Daniela, I know this is something you are also very passionate about, and I was wondering if you wanted to chime in and share some of your thinking as well.
Sure, and Jess and what Jen has said, I also wanted to identify first what are the similarities of differentiation and also personalized learning. And I think that's the how, which are both models of this teaching and learning, is that the instruction is tailored to meet the learning needs and preferences and goals of the students. But what is real the difference? I would say the difference is that personalized learning includes the when. And the when is because the students can take different speeds and pace to go throughout the curriculum. And also in personalized learning, like Jane was explaining, it includes more student collaboration, which is related to voice and choice. Here, the students are really co-creating the learning activities, and everything relies more on the student personal interests and their curiosity.
Great, thanks, Daniela. Another question that has come in, which I think is a really good one, is from somebody who was scheduled to take the course with us this summer. And the person wrote, I will be a core teacher for teaching project-based learning in August. Firstly, everyone seems to have a different notion of what PBL is and what it should look like in action. So how do we come to consensus around this? And I was thinking maybe, Melissa, you could start us off. And Rich also has lots of experience with this. So maybe, Rich, you could share your thinking after Melissa.
Yeah, I thought this was such a great question. And, in thinking about the idea of consensus, I think, one thing I just wanted to point out first is that I think it's important to have consensus sort of within a particular context, at a particular school, not necessarily globally, though. I think that what the type of project work that we're aspiring to at High Tech High within our particular context of being a public charter school in the US is different than what PBL might look like at an IB World school. And that's okay. But I think that connecting and collaborating with your colleagues to sort of calibrate what type of project work you are aspiring to is really what's most important.
Great, thanks, Melissa.
I think that's a great point about reaching consensus, Melissa. I think also there are organizations that have not only been promoting PBL, but have been doing some fairly rigorous research on it as well. So another organization that I'm affiliated with is Pbl Works. They used to be known as the Buck Institute for Education. And for 30 years, they've been looking at what works in project-based learning and are constantly sort of refining their model to find out like what are those things that actually lead to deep learning and persistent learning on the parts of kids. And so the sorts of things like sustained inquiry and collaboration and opportunities for students to have a longer term investigation of a subject. The role of critique and revision, so giving students a chance to receive feedback and then act on it. And then also things like a public product where they have a chance to actually share their work in a meaningful, real world way with an audience that is a public audience. So I think that idea of just sort of seeing what's out there in terms of different models, but looking for the commonalities between the different models is important as well.
Great, thanks, Rich. Another question that's come in is, how do I incorporate content teaching in project-based learning? How much time can I get to teach my content, if any? Another really good question. And Melissa, I was wondering if you could start us off, and then Jen, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this as well. I know you spend some time with this topic.
Yeah, another great question. And just a quick shout out to some of my former colleagues who I see in the attendees list. Some of my colleagues from Rio, so hello to you all. But yeah, I think the answer to that question starts with the design of the project. And I think that ideally when you're designing a project, you're doing so in a way that the project really necessitates that content that you want to teach. And so, if designed well, the students, in order to create that product or engage in that shared experience that they need to do through the project, they need that content that you are tasked with teaching them or facilitating an experience where they discover that learning and create that learning themselves. And so I would just encourage people to really focus on that, like within the design of the project. And then absolutely, as Rich pointed out, any good project is rigorous and is rich with content, and those two things are certainly not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and I think building on what Melissa said now, and also, Melissa, your comment earlier that I think is a really important piece for all of us to hold on to, which is that idea of context. When I looked at that question and I was thinking about it, I was thinking, I can imagine one of the roles I've had in my school is the IB diploma coordinator. And I can imagine someone that teaches in the IB diploma coming in and saying, what do you want me to do with this? How am I supposed to make this work? And I think that the power of the content and the necessity of what Melissa referred to, that really rich and deep understanding, is there. And I think it's an opportunity for teachers to ask themselves questions around, given that there are some parameters that aren't changeable. So Daniela referred to things like time and wanting to give flexibility. Obviously, the IB diploma doesn't allow for that. There is a time at which things happen and there are targets that are set. On the other hand, when you have students who are 16, 17, 18 years old, there's a lot of opportunity to really engage them into what might it look like for them to dig deeply into this, what resources might be in the community for them to be able to reach out to and gain authentic experiences. And it's not about saying, for 2 years of my IB diploma biology class, this is how I'm teaching it. It's all project-based learning. It's more about looking for openings and opportunities so that kids see there is purpose, there is evidence. I'm an active participant in this process. And, if there's one, kind of thing that we can take away from what's gone on in the last few months with regard to something like the exams being canceled, is what I hope every IB diploma teacher could look back at and say, there was still value to my class, even if those exams didn't happen at the end of it. And I think that these resources of thinking about how to integrate this into teaching validates that for kids beyond sitting for an examination where in isolation that content is applied.
Jen, that is almost the most perfect segue to going into this next question, which is really thinking about student voice and choice. So as teachers, how do we ensure that student choice and voice is integrated into this idea of project-based learning without derailing the project, is the question that was asked. So I think everybody might have some thoughts on this. I don't know, Rich, you have been doing a lot of work around student voice and choice. Would you like to get us started?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions about project-based learning sometimes is that it's just sort of free range, where kids are just allowed to just explore any topic and dive into it. And certainly there's a place for that in kids' education. But I think one of the most important parts about PBL is exactly what we've been talking about, like using it as a chance for students to learn material from the curriculum in meaningful, impactful ways. And so that just speaks to the fact that there might be times when you just don't want to turn things over to kids, right? So students may not have a good sense of what are the learning goals and the curricular objectives that we're trying to meet there. So there are certainly things that we do want to give students voice and choice in, but things that we might be a little bit more careful. I think one thing to do is to consider, like, what are some of the areas where you could give students a sense of ownership over that project. So it could be students having a say in the teams that they're working on, or the roles that they're playing within a certain team, or giving students the opportunity to make decisions about the media they might use, or the format that they might use to present their final products. And clearly, voice and choice and ownership leads to engagement. But I think it really depends on the nature of the project and the teacher's experience with PBL. Oftentimes it will encourage teachers to sort of, if they're new to PBL, to keep the reins fairly tight in terms of what they're passing to the students. And then as both teachers and students become more familiar with the methodologies of PBL, you can kind of relax those reins a little bit and pass more of the ownership over to the students.
Yeah, I also just wanted to jump in the course that Rich and I teach over the summer. One of the specific strategies that we have people practice is the question formulation technique. And this is something that I actually learned from Rich, and it comes from the Right Question Institute. So you can Google that. We'll also share that resource. But it's a way that you can really help spark that interest and inquiry from students, where you have the basic plan of your project in place, but now you're giving students a chance to generate their own questions and help you understand what the student's interest is. So you might make some adaptations in your planning. So I think that's a really good tool, and a great way to launch into a project is using the question formulation technique. Okay. So we've been talking a bit about project-based learning, and I just want to transition us into the element of design thinking. So somebody asked the question, are there ways to incorporate aspects of design thinking into classrooms? And if so, what might some of those ways be? And Daniela, I'm wondering if you might be able to get us started with some of your thinking around design thinking.
Yeah, and I think there's a great connection between these questions and the previous question. And, design thinking is a methodology for creative problem solving that can be embedded into project-based learning. Design thinking is nonlinear. It's a process that the students use to understand the impact that humans have on solutions, or to challenge assumptions, or redefine problems, and create innovative solutions to prototype and test. I would really recommend using the design thinking stages by the Stanford D School. And these stages are not always sequential, and the students, they can use them in parallel, out of order, or repeat them during class. So I think this will be a great strategy for project-based learning in the classroom.
Great, thanks, Daniela. And Rich, I know you have been doing a lot of design thinking work this year with students. I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this question as well.
Yeah, Danielle makes a great point there. The D school approach is sort of very tried and true. One element of the whole design process that I absolutely love and love to communicate to students is that what we would call the iterative process, or the what I talk to students about, sort of a cycle of improvement. And I think that's a really critical part of design thinking, where students will take feedback and then they'll act on that feedback in order to sort of spiral and improve the work that they're working on. But that's a really powerful tool that I think we should be embedding in every educational experience that kids have, where they have a chance to learn something and then try it out and receive feedback and then act on it and gradually improve. And in fact, if we take the broader view, we can kind of view kids from pre-K all the way up to college is just this one long cycle of improvement, where we're just trying to get them to take the feedback that they receive from their teachers and their peers and their parents, and use that to just improve. And if you can take that kind of microcosm of a design experience and then broaden it, it can really be powerful in terms of students seeing that this is all just part of a larger kind of path of their learning in their life. So.
Great, thanks, Rich. We had a question come in, and I know that this is one that's on a lot of people's minds, and that is, what does project-based learning look like in a virtual environment? So if you had been in the middle of a project and all of a sudden you had to go online, like, how does that continue? And Melissa, I was wondering how you guys did that at High Tech Middle Media Arts.
Yeah, well, that was very challenging, and some of our projects did, they had to be adjusted quite a bit. We obviously didn't have in-person exhibitions, but I think what was so interesting about distance learning was that while all of a sudden we had all of these constraints that we had not had previously, we also had all of these opportunities. And a lot of the obstacles that might be there within the school day with regard to the bell schedule or, classrooms, those weren't there anymore. And so we actually had some teachers who continued with their projects, and then rather than having in-person exhibitions, hosted webinars, much like this one, where they were sharing the students' project work with audiences that were far larger than they might have been in the in-person setting. So, I don't know that there's one answer to that, but I think just sort of like looking at, yes, what are some of the obstacles and constraints, but then what are the opportunities that are presented in that virtual space?
Great, thank you. And that's actually a really good place for us to transition into our resource share, because I know that after looking through the resources each of our panelists have selected to share with you today, that there are some good tools to help you really with all of the questions that have been asked, but also with some of those ideas around what project-based learning looks like in a remote environment. So Jen, maybe you could start us off with a resource share, and then for everybody who's out there, I will be sharing the links to each of these resources so you can access them. If you registered through Zoom, I'll be sending you an email. If you're watching us live on Facebook, I'll post the links on our Facebook page. So Jen, let's hear a little bit about your resource.
Yeah, so the resource that I selected is actually a piece I found in from ASCD about passion projects. And actually the context of what the author is presented it in is in virtual environment. She's couched it in that. And she refers to the fact that this is something that she's done before that. And I think one of the things I really liked about this article was that it provides a really concrete overview of a week by week sort of way that she approaches it. She's really clear about what are the outcomes. So if this is something that you're new to doing, or if it's something that you're looking at maybe being able to adjust for ages of students at different places, the article gives some background and context and then gives some really concrete, like a template that you could follow to be able to try out doing some passion projects with kids.
Great, thanks, Jen. Daniela, I'm going to have you go next because I also know that your resource is a great one for, especially for being in a virtual environment.
Exactly, Kristen. So the resource that I'm going to share, it's a website. It's from my professional experience, and it's a resource that my school has been currently using to use design thinking in order to come up with different possible scenarios when we reopen school in August 2020. So that's mural.co. Is a digital workspace for visual collaboration. So think about it as a huge non-stop whiteboard with a lot of sticky notes. And I think it's a great tool for design thinking, for visible thinking routines, and also to improve adult or student team collaboration and engagement. So I hope you like it.
Great, thanks, Daniela. Melissa, would you share your resource with us?
Yeah, so I have a folder that I just call the PBL playlist, some of my favorite resources. So when I have the opportunity to travel around to different international schools and talk about PBL, I share this folder with everyone. And so in that folder are lots of different resources and links. And there's one I'll just point out. So I have like a top 5 subfolder. And in that is a really great one pager called The Hierarchy of Audience, which I think is really useful because it really sort of illustrates how you can increase authenticity of student learning and student tasks through thinking about the audience for those tasks. And that is really applicable in any setting, whether it's you're at a full PBL school or an IB school even.
Great, thanks, Melissa. And Rich, tell us a little bit about the resources you selected to share.
Yeah, I selected a bunch, but the one that I think anybody who's interested in project-based learning and learning more about it, the Pbl Works website, so that's pblworks.org website, has tons of great information, and they have an increasing library of ideas and recommendations for doing PBL in a virtual space through distance learning. One really interesting initiative that they've just started is called the Teachable Moment, where they actually have some recommendations of projects that parents can do with their kids, especially parents of younger kids during these times, especially now that we're on break, finding some ways to keep students learning going in meaningful ways and involving parents in there. So I'd really recommend people check that out.
Great, thanks, Rich. And Rich and I also had decided that we wanted to share a planning tool with you. So I'll give a little shout out to the planning tool. It's a project planner that we use in the course that we teach. So if you are new to project-based learning and are trying to think about how do I plan out a project and make sure that I have rich content and that it's rigorous and that I'm including assessments and all of the different elements of project-based learning that you heard our panelists talk about today, you can check out that planning tool and hopefully it will help you. So as we come to a close, we have a tradition at the TTC, and that is called our Nugget of Knowledge. During our summer institutes, we have daily morning meetings before our courses begin, and we always end those meetings with a nugget of knowledge. Typically, our nuggets of knowledge are given by one of the participants who are taking our course, but because we couldn't offer our course this summer, we have asked both of our course trainers to share a nugget of knowledge with you today. So our first nugget of knowledge is going to be given by Rich.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Actually, when I was a PTC participant about 23 years ago, I actually did a nugget of knowledge or a pearl of wisdom. So this is sort of like brings things full cycle. So so I wanted to talk a little bit. For the last 10 years or so, I've been just trying to incorporate more PBL, more design thinking into my work, more authentic student experiences, and my nugget of knowledge has to do with something that I've been noticing students saying over during that time. So there are 3 words that I hear from students that really provide some interesting feedback for the work that we're doing. We've been talking a lot about the role of feedback in design thinking and PBL. So, and those 3 words that I've increasingly been hearing my students work are, hey, it works. And they don't actually say it like that. They actually say it like, hey, it works. And what I've found myself doing is, first of all, I started to notice that students were saying those 3 words. And then I started to think about, like, hey, what does that mean when they're saying, hey, it works? And how can I cultivate that? And increasingly, like, how can we celebrate those moments where kids say those words? Usually I see that a student's trying to solve a specific problem and they've been working at it and trying to iterate solutions, and then all of a sudden something clicks and it works, and they all of a sudden realize that it's working. And to me, that moment feels just like almost like the crystallization of what we're trying to do with kids. For students to see their learning actually working. When they say it works, what they're really saying is, oh, I understand what success looks like in this specific activity, and I've achieved success, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it. And when they say, hey, what they're really saying is, wow, I'm sort of surprised about the fact that I was able to do that. And that's really fertile ground. That can then lead to a conversation about, okay, so why did this thing that you were doing work? And what did you do to get it to work? And how can we apply those same strategies to other parts in your life? And okay, you got it working, but how can we get that to work even better? And I think too often in education, we're sort of preparing students for some like future application of their learning, right? Like, learn this because possibly 25 years down the road, you might have a job at which you like use this specific piece of understanding. And what I would like to do is sort of make a case for shortening the timeline on which students get to see the actual application of their learning in meaningful ways, in ways that matter. That they shouldn't just be learning things to be able to kind of get them into college, or that they'll use it in high school, but they actually get to see the real meaningful application of their learning in the short term. So my nugget of knowledge is to encourage people to think about what might hey, it works look like in your classroom or your school or your discipline, and then what are some ways to foster that those moments with your students? So, you know, hey, that algebra equation works. You did something meaningful with it, and you were able to accomplish something using that equation. Or, hey, that verb conjugation worked. Like, look at that profound idea that you were able to express because you know the subjunctive. Or, hey, that play that your class performed, or that piece that your band played, it, hey, it worked because look at the emotion that you were able to provoke on the part of your audience. So I think I really believe that providing students with those opportunities to have the knowledge and skills and understanding that they are working away at, to have those actually work in meaningful and authentic ways, really that's what leads to engagement with kids and leads to real learning. So that's my nugget.
Great, thank you, Rich. And Jen, let's hear your nugget of knowledge for the day.
Great. Rich, that was really great to hear. I think it's really exciting to kind of be able to think about this in such an aspirational way. And I think as I was listening to it, it sort of grounded me in why I had thought about the nugget that I chose. I think in the personalizing learning class, a couple of questions that come up a lot are about how do we balance individual instruction with sort of building community and having kids see personalization is not, it's all about me by myself. It's actually about us as a community and a collective moving forward. And another question that comes up a lot is about how do we get kids ready for that? How are they ready to take that kind of ownership? Because a lot of aspects of what schooling is for kids don't necessarily encourage the type of agency that we've spent time talking about in the last 45 minutes. And it's a really exciting thing to think about. How can we get kids to be exactly where Rich described them? So a very sort of small, if this is something that's new to your classroom, if this is something, a practice that you're introducing to your community, one of the things that's very common for a lot of us in our classrooms is that we do something like an exit ticket. And we use that as a way to gather some feedback from kids to see where they are in their learning. And then we can use that actually to be more effective when we go into the classroom the next day. We might develop a conference around that. We might develop a mini lesson. And one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is actually to start also integrating an opportunity in the opening of the next time the class meets to sharing out that data and having kids see that what that one exit ticket was for them makes a larger mosaic and picture of what the learning is in the classroom. And I think it's something that when you do that, it allows you a chance to answer those two questions in small ways in your classroom. It allows you to elevate each child's sense of, I'm not here by myself doing this one thing alone. All of us on this panel have talked about collaboration as a really key element of project-based learning, of design thinking, of any personalization. And so this is a chance to build that in the classroom, and also a way to really have kids see that even when it seems like something small to them, it's really elevating the importance of their voice in the classroom. So if you can take that and synthesize the questions that were asked and organize them, or share out some of the concepts that came out from different problems people are wrestling with, the stages of that ongoing development might be handing that data analysis over the kids. If it's something brand new that you're doing, this is a great way for them to see that what you've taken away as a teacher is actually something that they can have some co-ownership over and can help all of them move forward as a collective.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. I want to thank Jen and Rich for their nuggets of knowledge, and Melissa and Daniela and Jen and Rich for a really enlightening panel discussion today, and to thank everybody out there for joining us. We will be sharing our resources from today in an email, like I said earlier, for all of those who have registered through Zoom, and then we'll also be posting links to those resources on Facebook. Some of you have asked about how you can access the videos from earlier this week. Our videos from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are now up on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and put in the Principals Training Center, you should be able to view those videos, and we're also posting the links to the resources there. Tomorrow, we're not going to be live, but I will post a video on YouTube with highlights from the week. In addition, I'll be emailing each person who registered for this event what we're calling a resource roundup, so we can make sure that you have access to all of the great resources that have been shared every day, and we'll be sharing that in one curated place, so you can just click on the link once and access all of these great resources. Again, if you're watching live on Facebook, we'll be posting a link to those resources on Facebook as well. So I wanted to thank everyone so much for joining us today. This has been a great virtual community week for international school teachers. Next week, we're going to be hosting a virtual community week for our international school teacher leaders. And then the following week, we will have a community week for school counselors. So we hope to see some of you again with us. Go forth and learn, and have a wonderful, restful, and rejuvenating vacation. Bye, everybody.